History remembers warriors, but too often forgets the women who stood among them, fighting, surviving, resisting. This is the story of one such woman, a Cheyenne warrior, forged in fire and blood, as fearless as any man who rode into battle. Her name, at least as an English speaker would pronounce it, was Mochi. Mochi was born around 1841 among the Southern Cheyenne people near what is now Yellowstone, Wyoming. From a young age, Mochi would have begun learning the roles and responsibilities expected of Cheyenne women. Guided by her mother and the other women of the tribe, she would have been taught to cook, to clean, to skin animals and tan hides. She would have learned to sew and bead, to forage for edible plants and healing herbs, and to prepare traditional medicines. With the arrival of her first menstruation, Mochi would have been recognized as a woman, ready to take on the responsibilities of adulthood. In her early teens, she was married to a man from her tribe. Sources differ on his identity. It was with this man that Mochi was living when her people, led by Chief Black Kettle, set up their village at a place called Sand Creek, in the southeastern region of what was then the Colorado Territory. The settlement included nearly 130 lodges, belonging to people of the Cheyenne, who simply called themselves Tististas, or the people, and the Arapaho nations. In 1861, Chief Black Kettle had traveled east to meet with President Abraham Lincoln about the hardships his people faced at the hands of white settlers and soldiers. In a gesture of supposed goodwill, Lincoln presented him with a large American flag. Black Kettle flew that flag with pride, alongside a white flag of truce, above his lodge, believing it would provide protection. But at dawn on November 29, 1864, any such hope would be shattered. Approximately 700 soldiers descended on the village, while most of the Cheyenne warriors were away on a hunting trip. Colonel John Shivington, leading the attack, saw Black Kettle's flags, clear signals of peace. But he gave the order to attack anyway. What followed was not a battle. It was a massacre. By the afternoon, approximately 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho people, most of them women, children, and elders, had been brutally slaughtered, shot or stabbed as they tried to flee. The soldiers then set fire to the village, burning it to the ground. Among the survivors was 23-year-old Mochi. Her husband was dead. So was her father. Amid the carnage, Mochi found her father's prized rifle, a weapon gifted to him by a white man. She picked it up, made a vow of vengeance, and disappeared into the nearby brush. As darkness fell over the smoldering ruins of the village, Mochi and other survivors crept from their hiding places and began moving north, following the creek bed. Imagine the terror, the acrid stench of burning lodges in your nostrils, and the cruel laughter of soldiers echoing in the distance. Men who had just murdered your family and friends. It's no wonder Mochi was filled with a steely resolve, not just to survive, but to avenge the deaths of her loved ones and so many others who had been needlessly slain. With almost nothing to protect them from the biting November cold, the survivors, some of them injured, pressed on through the night and into the next day, covering nearly 45 miles on foot before they reached a dog soldier encampment near the Smoky Hill River, known to the Cheyenne as the Bunch of Trees River. The dog soldiers welcomed them with food, clothing, and care. They tended to wounds and sent out wolves, Cheyenne scouts, to search the trail for any injured left behind. As news of the massacre spread, so did the fury. Runners traveled from camp to camp across the plains, carrying the sacred war pipe, a powerful symbol that had never before been sent out during winter. Traditionally, winter was a time of survival, not warfare. Before Sand Creek, the war pipe had only ever been passed in spring. But the horror of the massacre required immediate action. Outraged by the atrocity, the dog soldiers and nearly every leader who received the pipe smoked from it, pledging themselves and their people to war. War parties began preparing for raids along the Platte River. This wasn't just about revenge. The survivors of Sand Creek had lost everything. Their lodges had been burned, their families shattered, their supplies destroyed. They were left destitute to face the brutal plains winter with nothing. They needed food, blankets, clothing, tools, the basic necessities required to stay alive. To take those things from other Indigenous communities who were already struggling under the weight of colonization would only deepen their hardship. So the burden, they decided, should fall on those responsible. If white settlers and soldiers had brought this suffering upon the people, then it was from them the survivors would take what they needed, whether it was offered or not. After a series of smaller raids along the Platte River, warriors from the Cheyenne, Sioux, and Arapaho peoples united for a larger raid. Their target? Julesburg, a larger settlement along the Overland Trail that held a stagecoach station, a general store, and a warehouse stocked with goods. Everything the survivors needed to endure the winter. On January 7th, 1865, a force of nearly 1,000 warriors launched a coordinated attack on a military outpost near the town, Camp Rankin. While it was the men who fought the battle, the women had a vital role to play in what followed. They brought with them a herd of extra horses, meant to carry their spoils back to camp. Among those women was Mochi, no longer a bystander, but an active participant in the fight for her people's survival. The plan was brilliant, and it worked. A large force of warriors surrounded the fort under cover of darkness. They waited with lances, shields, bows and arrows, and for some, rifles taken from earlier battles. As the first light of dawn broke over the plains, they remained hidden, ready. Then came the bait. A smaller band of warriors, led by Big Crow, rode up to the fort and opened fire on the guards. As expected, about 40 mounted men, led by Captain Nicholas J. O'Brien, charged out of the gates in pursuit, leaving the fort largely unprotected. Once the soldiers had been lured far enough away, the hidden warriors surged forward, encountering little resistance. Then the call went out for the women. They loaded up the spare horses with everything the soldiers had left unguarded: flour, sugar, molasses, sacks of cornmeal, beans, bacon, canned goods. They took what they needed and felt they were owed. Mochi helped herd those horses, now heavy with goods, back to the people's camp. By the end of the day, the people had suffered no casualties. But around 15 soldiers were killed in the fighting, along with several civilians inside the fort. Among those killed in the raid was a military bugler. His horse was claimed by a Cheyenne warrior named Medicine Water. Later, as Medicine Water added the horse to the communal herd being tended by the women, he crossed paths with one of them, Mochi. It was the first time they met. Something sparked between them, an unspoken understanding forged in shared loss and rising purpose. In time, Medicine Water would become Mochi's second husband. Together, they would raise 3 daughters. And in the months and years that followed, they would ride into battle side by side. Bands of Cheyenne, Sioux, and Arapaho warriors didn't just target forts and settlements. They also struck the infrastructure that held the frontier together. Stagecoaches were ambushed. Telegraph lines were cut, more than 70 miles of them, crippling communication across the region. The result? Denver was effectively cut off. Supplies couldn't get in. Messages couldn't get out. The city grew hungry, but its inhabitants were trapped. Travel was too risky. Any wagon or coach that left risked being attacked. Eventually, the U.S. government opened the door to negotiations. If you saw my video on the public universal friend, you might remember what I said about how trustworthy treaties were in U.S. history. 1,000 crumbs to you if that rings a bell, or if you go check it out after this. To curb continued conflict with Black Kettle's people and their allies, the U.S. government proposed the Medicine Lodge Treaty of 1867. Under its terms, the Cheyenne would be relocated to small reservations in Indian Territory, what we now call Oklahoma. In exchange, the government promised provisions: food, blankets, shelter, and clothing. The people would need them. Buffalo, central to Cheyenne life, were vanishing, thanks in no small part to a campaign of deliberate overhunting by white settlers and soldiers. Black Kettle believed, perhaps desperately, that peace was the only path forward. He and 14 other chiefs signed the treaty, hoping it might bring relief. His people were settled on a narrow strip of land along the Washita River, but the promised supplies were never delivered. Other Cheyenne bands, those who had refused to sign, continued to raid. And who could blame them? It's hard to say who suffered more, those who resisted or those who tried to make peace. The truth is, there was no good answer. The people had been forced into an impossible position. Medicine Water, along with his brothers Iron Shirt and Man on a Cloud, joined the Bowstring Warrior Society, a group that remained committed to resistance. And always, at Medicine Water's side, was Mochi. On November 27, 1868, just 4 years after the Sand Creek Massacre, almost to the day, Black Kettle's band was attacked again. This time, the 700 men were led by none other than Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. By the end of the attack, Chief Black Kettle was dead. Many others who died were women and children, unarmed, running for their lives. After the fighting, Custer ordered the people's lodges burned and more than 800 of their ponies shot in the head. Then he rode further downriver, looking for more native villages to destroy. Medicine Water and Mochi survived the attack, along with their daughters. Their eldest, Measure Woman, possibly Medicine Water's child from an earlier marriage, was not yet 5 years old. During the chaos of the assault, Measure Woman was shot in the hip. But somehow, Mochi and Medicine Water managed to get their children out, thanks to the sacrifice of a young warrior named Redbird, a close friend of their family. Redbird shielded Mochi and her injured child as they crossed the frigid waters of the Washita River, firing back at the soldiers who were trying to kill them. He gave them every second he could. Redbird was finally brought down by enemy fire, but not before Mochi and Measure Woman had made it across. They were alive because of him. Once it was safe, Redbird's relatives returned to his body and gave him a proper warrior's burial atop a wooden scaffold. For Mochi, this second brutal attack and the near loss of her own child hardened something inside her. After the Battle of the Washita, Medicine Water became chief of the Bowstring Warrior Society. He led raids targeting white buffalo hunters who were driving the animals to extinction. Then, on September 11, 1874, Medicine Water, Mochi, and their band encountered a white family camped on Cheyenne land in Kansas, territory that, according to the treaty, still legally belonged to the people. The family, John and Lydia German, and their 7 children, had been traveling from Georgia to Colorado Territory, hoping to start a new life. That life ended in violence. John, Lydia, and 3 of their children were killed. 4 of the daughters were taken captive: 17-year-old Catherine, 12-year-old Sophia, 7-year-old Julia, and 5-year-old Nancy. The band took supplies and goods from the German family's wagon, then set it ablaze. This ordeal could not have been easy for the German sisters, who were undeniably innocent victims in this tragic episode. They didn't choose to intrude on the lands and lives of the people. They had no say in following their parents across the plains. And as for John and Lydia German, they were simply trying to reach land the U.S. government had told them was theirs for the taking. How much did they truly understand about the injustices being carried out against Indigenous peoples at the time? Yes, they were killed by the bowstring warriors, but when it comes to the larger picture, does more of the blame lie with the government that pushed settlers into contested territory without regard for the native nations already living there? Is there room for empathy toward Mochi, Medicine Water, and their fellow warriors, despite their violent actions? Or should those actions be wholly condemned? Is there a space for an answer that lies in between? Let me know what you think in the comments. These are hard but important conversations, and I only ask that we keep things respectful. The younger 2 girls were traded to Graybeard and his band. About a month later, on November 8th, that band was attacked. During the chaos, the girls were rescued. They were emaciated, reportedly near starvation. After speaking with Julia and Nancy, Kiowa scouts working alongside the U.S. Army were sent to track down the 2 older sisters. They discovered that Catherine and Sophia were still being held by the Cheyenne, with a band led by Stone Calf. Mochi and Medicine Water were part of that same group. By March 5th, 1875, the people's situation had become dire. Facing starvation and the futility of continued resistance, the bands of Stone Calf, Graybeard, and other leaders surrendered at the Darlington Agency. Catherine and Sophia were turned over, used as bargaining chips during the negotiations. The sisters recounted the horrors of their captivity. Catherine, just 17, described suffering the kinds of abuses one might sadly expect a young woman to suffer in such a situation. They identified Mochi and Medicine Water among those responsible for the deaths of their parents and for the mistreatment they had endured. Mochi and Medicine Water, along with 30 others accused of various crimes, were bound in irons and sent on a weeks-long journey to Fort Marion, Florida, where they would be incarcerated. By the time they arrived, their wrists and ankles bore permanent scars from the shackles. Mochi was the only Native American woman to be imprisoned by the U.S. Army as a prisoner of war. The two were held at Fort Marion for 3 years. In 1878, they were returned to Darlington and reunited with their people. But much had changed during their imprisonment. The Cheyenne way of life, their language, culture, and traditions had been actively suppressed in an effort to erase the people's identity. On top of that, prison had taken its toll. Mochi had developed tuberculosis while incarcerated, and her health never fully recovered. She died in 1881 at just 41 years old. She was laid to rest along the banks of the Washita River with all the honors befitting a Cheyenne warrior woman. Medicine Water lived on for another 45 years. He remained committed to his people, working with the Native American Church and fighting for the education of Cheyenne youth. In 1891, the government allotted him land near Watonga, in what was then the Oklahoma Territory. He lived there into his old age. Medicine Water died in 1926 at the age of 90. He was buried with all the honors due a head war chief of the Cheyenne Bowstring Warrior Society. Mochi and Medicine Water lived through a brutal chapter of history, fighting to survive, to resist, and to hold on to their way of life. Their story is complex, painful, and important. History like this isn't easy, but that's why it matters. If this made you think, please like, subscribe, ring the bell so you never miss a story, and share your thoughts in the comments. Respectfully. Let's keep these conversations going. And if you know someone who should hear this story, share it with them. These are the stories that need remembering. Thanks for watching.